Hello and welcome to the Valley. Today I am your host, Janet Michael. We've got a super cool history show of sorts in store for you today about the Civilian Conservation Corps, specifically Camps Roosevelt and Wolf Gap in Shenandoah County. Carrie Hahn, my Shenandoah County tourism partner in crime, connected me with Rosemary Wallinger and Laura Fogel from the CCC Legacy Organization to learn more about how and why the Civilian Conservation Corps was created back in the 30s. It is a fascinating conversation. I'm slightly familiar with Camp Roosevelt only because my husband's family has a cabin that we pass Camp Roosevelt on the way to get there in Fort Valley.
Camp Roosevelt is well known throughout the country for a certain generation, not necessarily the younger one, but certainly ours and maybe another under it. But we have only recently discovered that Wolf Gap was here in Shenandoah County. Nobody here that we've talked to, other than maybe 3 people, had ever heard of it. So we are giving concentrated effort to get it into public awareness. They were both among the first 10 CC camps in the nation.
The Civilian Conservation Corps Legacy is the name of the organization that Rosemary and I are both involved in. We're both on the board of that organization.
I am currently the president of the CCC Legacy in Edinburgh, Virginia, which is the national CCC organization. We have members on our board, by the way, from Pennsylvania, from Arkansas, from Michigan, and from Florida.
And I'm currently the vice president of the CCC Legacy. Plus, Rosemary and I both were born and raised in Shenandoah County. And I have lived just 1 mile away from Camp Roosevelt for the last 43 years, since my husband and I were married and lived in the Fort Valley on that end of the fort. So I grew up knowing about the CCC. And so did Rosemary, and just have always been interested in it. But when the realization came to us about the Wolf Gap camp, we dug into it deeper, and that's how we landed on this organization. We really started out working on recognition for Wolf Gap and trying to get road designation for the State Route 675 that connects both of the camps, one on the east and one on the west side of the county. We wanted to get byway designation from the State Department of Transportation and tried to get naming to call that the Shenandoah County CCC Memorial Byway. We did get the designation of byway for the road, but now we're struggling to try to get it named. But that's how we got interested in this to begin with, and that's how we landed on the board of this organization. And we are trying to revitalize the organization that sort of lay fallow since 2018. The pandemic shut things down a lot, but that organization exists to promote the history of the CCC. And specifically here in Shenandoah County, years ago, there was grant funding and public funding and state funding that was allotted to build what is now the U.S. Forest Service office in Edinburgh, with the understanding that there is a room that was built onto that Forest Service office that was to become the James R. Wilkins Senior Interpretive Center. And it was to be all about the CCC, Camp Roosevelt, etc. And it was started, and what's there is really nice, but it was never completed because of this big gap. So we're trying, the organization is trying to get our footing again, get reorganized, which we are doing quite well, and get that interpretive center finished so that we can open it up for tourism for Shenandoah County and other ways to teach citizens and tourists about the history of the CCC. The organization has a national membership. We have members, usually they're descendants of people who were enrollees in the CCC camps, but not always. Children, descendants, relatives, or other people who just have a keen interest in the CCC history. So our organization is trying hard to push forward and get things going again. We would love the public to know about that. There's a membership. People can join the organization. We have a website they can go to join the organization if they want to and learn more about it.
We have it up and running, but it is in need of updating. The website is in need of updating and in need of some editing and whatever, but it is there. And I want to clarify what Laura said. We want to get that interpretive center finished so the public can come and see the whole picture. Anyone can go there now.
Yes.
It is open to the public.
It's just not finished.
It's just not finished.
You're talking about at the Lee Ranger District headquarters?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a beautiful, I think it looks amazing. I know every time I go there, the people there are like, oh, it's not finished though. But Janet, it's really something.
Yes. And one of our goals in the completion of it, and we're making it very clear, is that in the next phase, when it is completed, we want to be certain that the history of the Wolf Gap camp, which was here, just 22 short miles west of Camp Roosevelt, opened 1 month later than Camp Roosevelt, was one of the very first African American CCCs in the country.
Right.
That history and the overall history of the Black experience in the CCC is woven into what's there now.
That was going to be my next question, was how that ties into Black History Month, but that answers that question.
Good. It's a
Well,
fascinating history, and it's difficult to research because the information is difficult to find. The white CCC was well recorded, records up your wazoo, but the history of the Black camps it's just sparse, and what's there is difficult to find. And that's been one of our challenges. It's a fun challenge because when you find something, it's really exciting, but it is not a walk in the park. I have always been interested in the Black history of Shenandoah County. Yes. I grew up with the families that lived here in Mount Jackson. And I tripped over Wolf Gap because I was doing research at the time on my family's involvement in the historic race riot of 1880 in Shenandoah County at Columbia Furnace. So I'm on the Edinburgh Memories website. It's an excellent website. Zach is always posting to that site, looking up the race riot of Columbia Furnace. And I tripped over a fabulous post from Helen Larkin Burton. She had posted on that site. If you've ever been to Columbia Furnace, chances are you've gone by Larkin's store. It's still there. It's not owned by the Larkins, but it's the little grocery store at the foot of the hill before you turn to go up to Wolf Gap. And on that site, she posted the story of how, as a young girl, she liked to hang out in her father's store. She was not old enough to work in the store, but she and her siblings would hang out in the store. And she said she always loved to watch the boys from the Wolf Gap CCC when they came to get their mail. That was the first alert to me. I thought, what CCC are we talking about at Wolf Gap? And then she very famously said it was the first time she had ever seen a Black person. So I emailed Joe Lanin, who's been a lifelong friend of mine, and I said, Joe, what do you know? And he emailed back and he said, best kept secret in Shenandoah County. And he is the one who said he had always thought it would be great to designate Route 675 as the CCC Memorial Byway, which was like waving a red flag with me. And I know smart women when I find them, and I contacted Laura. We had a dozen to start with, a bunch of women, and said, here's a story nobody knows. I'd like to see, would you be interested in helping us get this out in the public domain? And they all jumped in. Joan Commoner, who has a background in forestry and is such an asset to this board.
Very involved in local history.
Very involved in local history.
And environmental pursuits.
Soil and water conservation, all of that. So she and Laura and I are now all on this board. And one of our greatest accomplishments, and we're so excited, one of the goals of the Wolf Gap, in addition to getting the history out and designating the road, was to see if we could find a descendant of an enrollee from Wolf Gap. And Roy Allen Cooper found us. He was working with Zach at the library. Long story, I won't go into detail, but he ended up contacting us. And he's now a board member. His father was Oswald Bentley Cooper. He was an enrollee at Wolf Gap. Roy is one of 9 children. His father, when he was in the CCC, met Evelyn McAfee, who lived in Woodstock. They married. They had 8 children.
9 children.
9 children. 8 boys and 1 girl.
Poor thing.
Her name's Georgia. I love that. And how would you like to be some guy wanting to date Georgia with her 8 brothers?
Right.
But they grew up on Water Street and then Spring Street in Woodstock. Roy's brother Bobby had a restaurant here.
He was the first cook at the Springhouse restaurant in Woodstock when Jim and Becky Ellis opened that restaurant back in, I want to say it was 1973, because I was a waitress there on opening night. And so I knew Bobby. And then he later opened his own restaurant north of town. He's since passed away. So there were a lot of connections. And Roy was really excited to find out that his dad had been an enrollee in the CCC. He kind of knew it, but he didn't know much
it
about
was.
it. Yeah, I didn't know where it was. So there's just been a lot of really neat threads that have run through this.
And Roy actually spoke to our Board of Supervisors. We have wonderful endorsements. We have endorsements from the Tourism and Economic Development, from the town of Edinburgh.
When we were working on the road designation.
Yeah,
That's what
this is when we worked on the road designation. So Roy spoke to the Board of Supervisors about the importance of the designation of 675 as our memorial byway as such a great way to recognize the accomplishments of the African American community to our community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how many people understand how much we are indebted to the CCC for the work they did, because the Wolf Gap Recreation Area, which was the Wolf Gap CCC, and the Camp Roosevelt Recreation Area are just parts of the benefits that we have today, because those areas were created, they were maintained, they were improved. The forest was regenerated because of the work of the CCC. They planted, Wolf Gap planted 16,000 acres of trees, 45 miles of road, including work on George Rye Road, Thorn Bottom Road, Wardensville, Liberty Furnace Road, 60 miles of horse trails, 100 miles of telephone line, 50 miles of roadside naturalization, 3 miles of stream improvement, as well as providing the protection for 100,000 acres of local forest, including responding to a 3-day fire at Cedar Creek in the fall of 1935. They rescued more than 1,200 residents out of floodwaters in March of 1936. So their accomplishments were just astonishing.
And it's shocking that it's unknown to have a list of accomplishments that long,
Yes.
and yet nobody even knows.
And nobody
is
even
crazy.
knows they were here.
So much of the history of the CCC in general is just fallen by the wayside. There are a lot of people who still have heard of the CCC, but there are so many in the generations that followed us who have never even heard of it. If you ask them, a lot of people in their 40s, even, have you ever heard of the CCC? They look at you like you have two heads. They have no idea what you're talking about. And then if you say Civilian Conservation Corps, they may understand that and have heard of it, but hardly any people understand the contribution of the CCC in general to our nation and how it was birthed by Franklin D. Roosevelt in an effort to bring this country out of the Great Depression and put men back to work. There was no work. People were starving.
15 million unemployed.
Yes, at that time. And so he started this huge New Deal program that immediately upon taking office, these bills were passed and they put it into effect. It was one of the fastest activated programs that was up and running within weeks after he took office. They were coming from all over the country. They had CCC camps all over the country. Do you know how many total? Do you have that statistic of how many total camps? I want to say like over 16.
Over 3 million employed by the CCC.
Right.
250,000 were African American, 80,000 were Native American, 4,500 CCCs in the country.
Yes. And they built almost all of the infrastructure for our current day national parks, many state parks all across the country. Many of the buildings that they built are still standing because their construction was so good. These young men were enrolled. They had to be 17 at the time, but many of the young boys lied about their age so that they could get into the CCC. They could be as young as 15, and they learned skills. They learned a lot of conservation skills. They were the original conservation organization in our country.
And set the practices that Forest Service uses today for taking care of our forest resources.
They learned metal working, iron working. They learned carpentry. They had classes that they were given. If they didn't know how to read and write, they were taught. They had school classes for these guys.
There's a wonderful story that James Wilkins writes of in his memoirs. And he said that the local boys here were sometimes embarrassed because they couldn't read or write, or because their reading and writing skills were not what they wanted them to be. But then he said, on the other hand, unlike the city boys, they didn't get lost in the woods.
That was going to be one of my questions, is how James Wilkins Sr. fits into all of this, because as somebody who was born and raised in Frederick County in Winchester, I of course know who he is. I know his son Jimmy. Shenandoah has the event center named after him, Wilkins Shoe Center, all of these things. So when you said that the interpretive center had his name on it, I'm like, wait, what?
James R. Wilkins Sr. was the projects superintendent for both Camp Roosevelt and the Wolf Gap CCC. It was his task to oversee the projects that the CCCs undertook. And the Interpretive Center, it was a dream of Joan Sharp, who was the president of the CCC before me.
The CCC legacy.
The CCC legacy before me. She is the founder of the CCC legacy. It was her dream, her idea. Jimmy Wilkins is alive and mostly well today in Winchester. His office is over the shoe store. As a kid, I got my shoes from Wilkins. We went to Winchester twice a year.
He is one of my favorite people on the planet. I adore Jimmy Wilkins.
And he was one of the primary funders of the Interpretive Center. He and his sister Donna, both of them are dedicated to this Interpretive Center and are as anxious as we are to see it completed.
It's so cool that things like that come together this way. And back in the day when these camps were started, there really wasn't a Frederick County or city of Winchester. I mean, there probably was, but we didn't think of it that way. We were all in the valley. So we didn't see the boundary lines like we sometimes do now.
Right. And we tend to claim Wolf Gap as Shenandoah County's own, but it belongs to the nation.
And Wolf Gap was one of the only camps that was actually in 2 states, because it's on the state line between Virginia and West Virginia. So it's at the top of the mountain at Wolf Gap. The great bulk of the camp was in Virginia, but there was part of it that was also across the West Virginia line.
The administrative buildings and the mess hall were in Virginia, and the barracks and the bathhouse were in West Virginia. They said they went to bed in West Virginia and walked over to Virginia to have their breakfast. The only thing remaining up there right now, I went up in winter because I asked Joe, I said, how much is there? And he said, well, it's winter, go on up and see, because if there's anything, you'll see it. So if you go up there today and you have photographs that we have for our PowerPoint presentations, you can tell where the buildings were because of the lay of the land, because of the age of the trees. You could see where those administrative buildings were, and you could see where the barracks were because they're over on the campground side, where the camping sites are. There's some steps. There are 3 stone steps.
Concrete.
Are they concrete?
I think they're concrete.
Maybe they are.
Yeah.
Okay, there are 3 concrete steps leading to nowhere, sitting right there on the forest floor.
And there are some old pieces of foundation stone you can see lying around that people have collected and used to build fire pits since then. But there are some pieces of foundation.
And I'm told the dynamite shed is just over the hill and on the way down. I haven't investigated that, so I wouldn't take that to the bank. But what I have noticed is
my husband always talks about that dynamite shed.
Does he?
Does he?
Yes.
Okay. It's still there. The one is still there at Camp Roosevelt.
Yes.
And I have been to Swallow Falls State Park, which was a CCC headquarters, and there's a dynamite shed there. So they were built to last for all the reasons you and I know.
You mentioned earlier the fact that so many people know about Camp Roosevelt and they don't know about Wolf Gap. What do you want them to know about Wolf Gap? You've got a platform here now to maybe teach a history lesson to people. What do you want them to know?
First of all, I want to know that it was here. It was every bit as important as Camp Roosevelt. At maximum, it was 215 men. They came from the same areas that the Camp Roosevelt boys came from. They came from the city. They came from Baltimore. They came from Arlington.
They were local guys.
They were local guys at Roosevelt. We have not found anybody from Shenandoah County at Wolf Gap. And it's a circle. If you study history, it's always a circle. That stems from the race riot of 1880 at Columbia Furnace that diminished our African American population considerably. After that riot, there were no jobs to be had in the county, and our African American population, the majority of them, moved to other places. But we want them to know that it was there, that it was doing the same work as everybody else and doing it well.
So the other thing you should know is that the first year of Camp Wolf Gap was not African American. It was a white camp.
Junior camp, yeah.
For the first year. And then because when they started the CCC program, they had not factored in how deeply segregated the South still was in the 30s, and that the whites and the blacks were not going to do well in the same camps together. So they decided that Wolf Gap would become an African American camp, and they had to ship some of the blacks from all these other areas to bring them in here. So that's why they were from everywhere else, was because they had to empty out the blacks from some of the other camps when they were segregating the camps and forming the African American contingent of the CCC.
When the CCC was formed, there was an African American legislator, Oscar Priest, who said there would be no discrimination according to race, creed, or color. It was not intended to be segregated, but Robert Feshner, who was from the South, declared that separate was not unequal. And Ickes took issue with that. But the result was that it became segregated for all the reasons Laura just said. So you had segregated camps after all.
But not in the whole country.
But not in the whole country.
Primarily in the South.
And in states where the African American enrollee population was not large enough to form an entire camp. They were integrated, but they were still segregated within the camps. In most places, there's a wonderful story of the Grand Canyon, one of the most difficult trails there, and I'm guessing it's the one down to the Phantom Range.
The Bright Angel Trail.
Yeah, was built by a CCC that was integrated. And I guess the National Park at the time put out wonderful photos of the enrollees, black and white, and Latina, and Native American. So they had an integrated camp.
And when you talk about these camps, did men apply? Was it like a job application? How did they get to be a part of that process?
They applied, but the supervisors are the one who did the selection. So they were selected by supervisors. Some states were good at it. Virginia actually had a lot of African American CCC enrollees, one of the higher number. And there were a couple states, Georgia was one of them, that refused to hire African American enrollees. Therefore, they were told that if they wanted a CCC camp at all, they would hire 10%. And so they started enrolling.
The camps were set up, they were run by the military in terms of how camp discipline and camp life was. They had barracks, they had to clean their barracks and have reveille and things you would expect in a military community. But the projects were run by the Forest Service. So they were living under military discipline, and the projects that they were working on were run by the Forest Service.
And there was significant blowback throughout the country. They did not want these camps to be military in nature or officially. Remember, they're coming out of World War I. And the communists had accused the country of having prison camps for workers. Yeah. So there was a particular emphasis on not naming them officially as military camps. But as Laura says, in style, they had taps, they had the military regulations in the barracks, they had weekly inspections and all of that.
Fitness programs run by the military to get them in shape, but the work that they did got them in shape. They worked really hard.
Average enrollee gained 35 pounds in his tour.
Because they were coming out of the Depression, they didn't have food, and these boys were paid $1 a day. They made $30 a month, $25 of which had to be sent home to their families. So it was another great stimulus program for the whole country because the guys that were working got to keep $5 a month, and their families got the other $25 back home wherever they were to spend on groceries and needs that they had. So they stimulated their communities. The communities around the CCC camps profited because they supplied the food. The farmers had work, the mercantiles had work, the lumber yards had work. So there was just so many ways that the CCC in general benefited the entire country, not just the work that the camps accomplished, but all of the support that went behind keeping a camp together. And when the country started doing better and prospering and we're coming out of the Depression, and the guys could find work closer to home, the CCC started to dwindle, and then when World War II broke out, they closed the camps, and all these guys who had this military training were recruited into the military, many of them. So that ended the CCC in, 1945?
Earlier.
43?
42 or 3, yeah.
Yeah, it started in 33 and lasted about 10 years.
Every camp had a number. The Wolf Camp was occupied by Camp 333C. C was for colored. In 1937, they were transferred to Wilderness in Fredericksburg to work on the beautification and repair of the Wilderness battlefield. And they were there for a year, and then they were transferred to Carteret, Maryland, to Cabin John, where they restored 23 or 25 miles of towpath on the C&O Canal. CC camps that were Black were intentionally placed in remote areas, presumably to avoid racist confrontation. The irony of it is that it's ironic, first of all, I think that they were sent to the Wilderness battlefield to do the work. But when they worked the battlefield to a point where tourists wanted to come and see what they had done and were frequenting the location, they were transferred to another camp that would be remote again. Often when they were transferred, there was public outcry for putting those camps in particular locations. The local population protested their being placed there, which is why most of the African American camps were in remote areas.
This is really fascinating stuff.
It really is.
So when we talk about the CCC legacy, Can I join? Can I be a
Yes.
member? What does that look like?
Absolutely. You can register online on our website. Our membership fee is $35, and you can either mail a check to CCC Legacy at P.O. Box 341, Edinburgh, Virginia 22824, or you can submit your payment online, and you will receive acknowledgement for receipt of that. And if you are a member, you will receive our quarterly publications. 3 of them will be bulletins, as we call them. The other will be a journal. The journal is going to be a little more elaborate. It will have stories of CCCs throughout the country and lots of information.
We also have a Facebook page, Civilian Conservation Corps Legacy.
If you've got a civic group that is interested in the story and wants a presentation, we will do it. We've been speaking to Lions Clubs. We have spoken to Ruritans. I spoke at the Woodstock Public Library last week, and the reception is so heartening because people love learning this. They are as entranced with this story as we are, and it's been a lot of fun because they are so interested and they ask great questions that lead us to going down some rabbit holes we hadn't considered going down, which means we learn more. Right.
The other thing it does too, Rosemary, is you mentioned this earlier, is that so much information is missing or difficult to find, particularly for the Wolf Gap CCC. So the more that you can talk about this to these civic groups, you never know who's related to who that was related to who, that as it turns out, hey, my great grandfather was part of a CCC camp. This is how you learn some of this history.
And that's a particular focus of mine because we were very fortunate. One of the best pieces of information on Wolf Gap we have is information that is included in what's called a regional annual. We don't actually have the annual, although Colette might have it. And the Columbia Furnace Camp is what they called it then. By the way, the Wolf Gap Camp originally was known as Camp George Washington in 1933 when it opened. And it became Camp Wolf Gap, presumably because of the location over time. So if you're looking it up, you look up Camp George Washington, you look up Camp Wolf Gap, you'll get some information. But there's a roster in that annual. They're the only photographs we have of the enrollees that were at Wolf Gap. But we have wonderful 2 huge portraits of groups of the men and their names and their hometown under it. So we know where they came from in Virginia. We don't have actual addresses, but there were any number of men from a community in Southwest Virginia called Agricola, Agricola. I'd love to go there and see if there are descendants there now. We have their names. We just haven't had time to do that kind of research.
The National Archives in Washington, D.C. has digitized a whole listing of the names of the enrollees in the CCC nationally. So you're able to go on that website now and look up your relative if you know their name. You could probably find information about them in the National Archives website.
The thing that I think sometimes people from the outside looking in can't fully grasp is how broad your search really has to be. You can't go at this with tunnel vision and say, I'm going to look for anything related to Camp George Washington or Wolf Gap CCC. You've almost got to do things like the National Archive, like Clark County's archives or the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley archives, because there could be people that lived in those areas that were part of the camp that is listed in their history that might not be listed in the history of the camp. So it's really got to be a shotgun approach to find some of this information.
It is. And you can trip over it when you're on a different path. One of the most fun moments I've had recently, we have boxes at U.S. Forest Service. We have boxes of letters, of files, of all kinds of things. And photographs, magnificent photographs. And one of our challenges is to identify what we have and organize it, keep what is appropriate to keep here, and then see to the placement of other things. We have a great story. Our treasurer, Lynn Ann Lawhead, her dad was a CCC enrollee. She had sent his scrapbook to the legacy, and it's a magnificent scrap. It's a piece of art. The cover is wood, and it's been carved. He served at Big Sur. So Lynn Ann, when we got on the board and realized we have all these things, Lynn Ann contacted Big Sur and said, would you be interested in the scrapbook my dad kept when he was at Big Sur with the CCC? And they were over the moon. They were so excited. And so they said, yes, we would love to have it. We went through an official process where the board approved release of these materials to go where they had originated. They've been sent and they have acknowledged receipt of them. They're just thrilled.
The whole point of Black History Month is to educate the masses on the role and the contributions that
Yes.
Black Americans have played in defining and developing our country. And yet,
Yes.
so many of their family members that are still with us, I think, feel like nobody's going to want to see this because it's not important to the general public. And it really is important. That's
It
why
is.
we need to celebrate things like Black History Month.
I agree.
I'm going to tell my favorite story because it goes far and wide. In this box that I was going through, I found a letter that referred to an article about a CCC rebellion in upstate New York. It was called the Preston Lake Rebellion. And I'm sitting here going, what is that? Turns out it was an African American CCC camp. The men had come out of Harlem. They were trained in Dix, New Jersey. They were sent to Preston, New York to serve. And some of them had been trained as leaders for their camp, and they were African American. When they got to camp, they were trying to make a quota, a certain number of men in the camp. So they brought more enrollees in who were not African American.
Mm-hmm.
And when the not African American enrollees joined the camp, it was decided that they could not have overall leadership of African Americans. So the African American leaders were told to step down to accommodate. And they rebelled for 3 days. And sadly, they lost. And those men who participated in the rebellion were sent back to Harlem. But I stumbled over that story and I wanted to know more about it. So I contacted the New York State Department of Recreational and Historical Resources and asked some questions. And they didn't know about the rebellion.
What?
So we made this great deal. I gave them the information on the rebellion. They gave me the information that I was looking for, and we're best buddies. It's just wonderful.
I hope that after this show airs, you are going to get so many Facebook messages and emails from people saying, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was a thing, but I have this box from my grandfather, or I have these letters from my grandmother that my grandfather sent to her.
Absolutely.
That you're going to get a lot more information now.
That would be great. When Rosemary mentioned Treasurer sending artifacts that her father had owned and used when he was in the CCC, sending those to Big Sur, we're looking all over the country for places that are now set up as CCC, museum, interpretive centers in state parks all over the country. There are so many of these places where local residents have wanted to preserve this history. And so if we have things that, because understand that the CCC legacy organization as it exists now went through a merger, what is 2008.
Yes.
In 2008, there was an organization called the National Organization of CCC Alumni, NACCCA. And that organization was waning because the alumni from the CCC were dying off in big numbers. There weren't very many of them left. The ones that were left were old. They weren't able to hold that organization together, but they had a wealth of information, archives, all kinds of artifacts, just unbelievable things. And they merged with the CCC legacy so that the CCC legacy could carry on the work. And so they sent everything they had. Cabinets and cabinets and files of all of this material, archives, artifacts that they had. So that's part of what is in the interpretive center are things that we received, but also we have all these materials that we're going to try to go through systematically and find out where they came from and try to contact the organizations that exist all over the country where the camps were and see if there's interest in having some of these artifacts returned to them, because we would love to see them in the location where they came from. So there's a lot of work ahead of us.
Yes. And again, I think that's something that a lot of times people who aren't in the weeds don't grasp how much work there is to do.
We didn't grasp it either when we signed up for this.
We did not. We did not.
What in the world have we gotten ourselves into?
We're still saying that.
Yeah, but it's really been fun. It's a journey. When you uncover layers of history, there's just a connection that you make with the past that is so inwardly rewarding. And you start to look back at all these people, these men who built this country. Really, the CCC restored the United States of America to what it became after World War II. And that history has been really set aside and forgotten. And glossed over or just moved on from. And even when it was happening and the CCC camps were closing, I don't think there was a sense at the time of what a historical contribution this had made and how people were going to look back on it. So they didn't go to a lot of trouble to preserve things. This is how history kind of happens by accident to us. People in the future get excited about it and interested in it, and they start digging backwards and trying to find all of the things that exist to tell them about it.
We want to get in the school system because one of our board members, Colette Silvestri Parcells, is in Enola, Pennsylvania, and she gives presentations on the CCC. And she was recently at George Mason University, and she said 300 kids showed up for her presentation. And the question they asked most frequently was, why weren't we taught this? This is unbelievable. Why is this not happening today? So this is the kind of connection that we really want to make. And I am a sucker for romance in history. And I visit Wolf Gap, and I have any number of times just because, driven from Wolf Gap through Edinburgh and over to Camp Roosevelt. And I've been in both camps at dusk when I can get sloppy sentimental, because if you stand there, it's so remote and it's so quiet. We're so lucky that these locations remain primarily rural and remote, protected.
And accessible.
And
Yes,
accessible.
Yeah.
And I'll stand up there and say, I can hear the voices and the door slam.
And the current day Youth Conservation Corps and AmeriCorps, all of those came out of the CCC. And there's still conservation corps of young people across the country that were birthed out of the conservation efforts of the CCC.
It fills you with hope, the fact that our newer generations are re-embracing those types of clubs. They want to do something that is meaningful, that will have a lifelong impact on not just themselves, but on the people in their community. So I'm really excited that your Gen Zs and some of your millennials and whatever the rest of those generations are named are interested in doing this kind of work. That's going to make your job easier moving forward as well.
Yes. Somebody's got to carry it on. You got to pass the torch. And we hope that we can rebuild this organization and get this history alive again for not just the local community, but provide resources here with the Interpretive Center completion that will allow visitors to come in and continue to learn. In just 7 short years, in 2033, we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of the CCC. And Camp Roosevelt was the first CCC camp in the nation. And that is very important to know that, and that Virginia, the state of Virginia, was truly, as our board member Colette Silvestri pointed out to us, is truly the epicenter of the CCC. So the state of Virginia needs to embrace that history and really understand how important the state of Virginia was in all of this.
So as we wrap up our conversation, let's come back full circle to that interpretive center. What do you need for that? Do you need people to write you a check? Do you need people, obviously, if they have items that could be donated for display in that center, at least to let you know that you have something, whether they make it to a display or as a rotating sort of thing. But what is the most valuable thing that the general public can do to help you get that finished?
We would welcome donations. We do have some donations that have been sitting, waiting to be used, but we would welcome more, because in order for this organization to continue to go forward and complete its work, we're going to have to hire some people. Right now, we're just an organization of volunteers. We need to hire an executive director and a staff, possibly at some point, to manage the organization and to keep things rolling and manage the Interpretive Center. The Interpretive Center, we are waiting right now to revitalize a formal agreement with the U.S. Forest Service. We must have a new agreement. The old one expired, and because of the pandemic, was not renewed, and it just fell by the wayside. So we're trying to get a new agreement with the U.S. Forest Service finalized that will allow us to complete the Interpretive Center. And once we get that agreement, then we've got to have some museum experts to come in and take a look at what's there, because what's there now may not be what stays there, because we're having different thoughts about what really needs to be in this Interpretive Center. So we don't really want people to send us their relics because we don't have any place to put them right now.
Unless Unless they're specific to Wolf Gap
Exactly.
and Roosevelt.
And it would be great to be informed of that if that's the case. And if they want information, if they find stuff that was their grandfather's and they were in a different state, we would possibly be able to provide the information of where they can contact someone and get that to them. But yes, we would take any and all donations. We would request that they be earmarked for general operations, because if they specify an earmark a donation for a certain project or certain thing, then it's restricted funds. We need some more unrestricted funds that we can use for general operations and management of the organization.
Well, I really appreciate the two of you getting together today and giving me this education. I thought this was going to be a simple, easy conversation because I'm like, oh yeah, I know where Camp Roosevelt is, and I have learned so much today.
And at Camp Roosevelt, anybody can go there now. There's wonderful interpretive signage at Camp Roosevelt that explains the whole layout of the camp. Pictures on these Forest Service placards they're situated throughout the campground. It's a recreation area now, Camp Roosevelt Recreation. It's a campground that the Forest Service operates during the warm months. It's closed right now, but you can go in there when the snow melts, if that ever happens. And
I was going to say, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I feel like we're going to have snow in June.
Long about May.
And walk around and see what was there. Visit that site. It's very well preserved. Wolf Gap Camp, when the Forest Service finishes restoring, they're doing a lot of renovations to the Wolf Gap Recreation area. When they complete that, we're going to get some signage up there too.
Perfect.
That's in the works.
Yeah, because that's where I really want to visit. Now that I know it exists,
Yeah.
I really want to go there and share that feeling and that sentiment that you have, Rosemary, when you go there. It does.
If you want somebody to go with you, let me know.
I will totally do it. Maybe we'll go up there and record a radio show standing from the.
That'd be awesome.
That would be awesome. And as we say to everybody we run into, spread the word that this is a thing. We want people to know that this is our history. And if they want speakers, if they want information, don't hesitate to let us know.
And on our website, ccclegacy.org, there are lots of archival informational pieces. There are photographs, there are videos, there are all kinds of other historical information links on that website, even though we're trying to rejuvenate the website and rebuild it at some point. What's there now is a little outdated in terms of the current day information that's on the homepage, but the archival information and the historic information in that website is still very relevant and current.
There's somebody listening that has a love of history, knows how important making sure people know about this history is, and they have website building skills to reach out to you and say, hey, I'll help you redo your website. Those kinds of volunteers are always welcome.
Yeah. Yes. We're looking for a website developer right now who can help us do that. We've reached out to some, but we haven't nailed it down yet. So if anybody out there listening is a web developer and could help us with that, reach out to us.
Well, Rosemary, Laura, thank you both. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to make sure we cover? Because I think we covered a lot.
I can't imagine.
I can't imagine either, but let me say what a pleasure it has been to work with you. You're so good at what you do.
Absolutely. Ditto.
You're just great. You made us feel at ease.
Yeah, it's been great chatting with you.
It's been great. Thank you.
So, Carrie, tell me about the cool, fun things that are happening on Valentine's Day in Shenandoah County.
The list is so long. I had to whittle it down because there's things going on in Shenandoah County on February 12, 13, 14, and 15. The entire Valentine's weekend, Galentine's Days, and other really cool shopping type of events. But I'm going to focus only on the February 14th events because there are so many. On Saturday, February 14th at 11 o'clock, you have a Valentine's Day wine and chocolate experience at North Mountain Vineyard, which is going to include 3 glasses of North Mountain wine, 3 chocolate-covered strawberries, and live music by Brennan Edwards from 1 to 4 p.m. Also on February 14th from 3 to 5:30 is the Valentine's Ride at Fort Valley Ranch and Campground. There you'll be doing that ride, plus you get like some sweet treats at the end, and they usually have a little campfire and you can make those little ornaments, which is loads of fun. Let's see, you also have a Valentine's dinner service at Flower to Fork. It's a 4-course menu with wine pairings. They have seatings at 5 and 7, and from what I understand, I checked in with them this morning, all of the 7 o'clock seatings are sold out, but they do have seatings for 5 o'clock. It should be a really incredible dinner. I went and looked at the website. The menu is incredible. I also have a Blue Wing Frog Valentine's Day dinner on February 14th, and that's at 5 o'clock, and that's in Strasbourg. They have an amazing menu plus a complimentary glass of champagne. You will need reservations, and I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to need reservations for anywhere you go in Shenandoah County for Valentine's Day. And then the last one I have is a Valentine's Day brunch on Saturday, February 14th at 11 o'clock in the morning at Wolf Gap Winery. So again, reservations required for that as well. That's what I have for February 14th. But if you go to our website, you will see that there are things going on for Galentine's Day happening both on Friday and on Sunday of this Valentine's weekend down in the town of Mount Jackson. They're doing a Cupid's Market. So any kind of gift giving that you want to give to your sweetheart for Valentine's Day, check out the Cupid's Market in Mount Jackson.
So we're recording this on the 6th of February. People are listening on the 10th. On the 11th, you and I are heading to North Mountain to record a show. People will get to hear later in February. I'm hoping they still have some of those chocolates and stuff.
We'll see. We're going to ask, right, when we get there.
Should we make a reservation and ask her to save us some? There is just always something fun that's happening. And I love that so many people really embrace, particularly Valentine's Day, because everything else outside is cold and gross and icy and snow. And this is a good excuse to get out and do something fun.
It's the truth. Yes, for sure. In Shenandoah County, we've got a lot.
You mentioned Flour to Fork.
Yes.
Are they doing anything for Fat Tuesday?
Right. So yeah, Fat Tuesday, that's the day before Lent. And so a lot of people, that's when Mardi Gras happens or when Mardi Gras ends. And so you always have all of this wonderful excess. And so there's I'm always talking about very famous Polish traditions in my family. And one of those things that is frequently served at Fat Tuesday is called a pączki, and it's spelled Paczki. It looks a lot like a jelly-filled donut, but it's bigger, and it has traditionally like a plum jelly or a rose jelly on the inside, and they're really delicious and they're really hard to find. Usually if I really need one, I'll drive it all the way into Vienna to the Polish market to get one. So Flour to Fork, I just talked to somebody there and they said that they're going to be making pączki around Fat Tuesday. So it's exciting.
So it's really going to pay off that your son's working there, isn't it? You're not even going to have to go pick them up. You're going to be able to have him just deliver them home to you, aren't you?
It's pretty nice. Insider tips.
So tell me one more time, where can people go get all the details about all the things?
For sure. Visit shenandoahcounty.com and then go to our events tab and you will see all the amazing things that are happening.
Thank you, my friend, for giving me a rundown on the events. And thank you for connecting me with Rosemary and Laura. It was a fantastic conversation.
It was so fascinating. I loved it.
I will meet you back here tomorrow for a brand new episode.